Hello and welcome to this 15-hour edition of the Practical Ethical Hacking course. My name is Heath Adams and I'm going to be your instructor for the entirety of this course. Okay, quick edit. So you might be looking at the YouTube video and seeing that it's only 7+ hours. That is because YouTube recently implemented a rule that we can no longer have videos over 12 hours. So I had to split this into two parts. I had to add this edit in and go back and re-render everything. So this is officially part 1. And we'll go through part 1, and then I'll have a link in the description below for part 2. So without further ado, let's jump right in. A really quick who am I? Again, my name is Heath Adams, and I am the CEO of TCM Security. We are a cybersecurity consulting firm and an educational institution. On a day-to-day basis, we primarily focus on what's called ethical hacking. That is where companies hire us to try to hack into them, to find vulnerabilities and let them know of any security issues they may have before the bad people find those on their own. That could be breaking into a network, a web application, wireless network, mobile applications, thick client applications, etc. It can even be breaking into a building, which is called physical pen testing. There's a lot of different types of hacking out there, and we're going to cover quite a bit of that in this course. Now, hacking is such an interesting field because you don't have to necessarily come from an IT background. I'm actually a former accountant and I just fell in love with hacking. And I know people from all different walks of life. We have somebody that works for us that used to be a mayor. I've seen doctors, I've seen pharmacists, I've seen all different kinds of weird backgrounds come into ethical hacking. So if you're watching this and you really don't have an IT background, a formal one, that's okay. As long as you have some basic computer knowledge, some basic networking knowledge, that's all you really need to succeed in this course. We're going to hold your hand the entire way through and make sure that you get and understand everything that's presented in front of you. In terms of the qualifications, I've listed my hacker certifications. That's not all the certifications, but those are the ones that are relevant, maybe make me an expert, whatever. I've also listed my social media. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn or follow the company on Twitter, follow me on YouTube. I would love if you just hit subscribe right now before we even get started, or you want to wait till the end. That's perfectly fine as well. We're making our way to 1 million subscribers, and you could be a part of that, and I would absolutely love it if you did. We also have some sites. We have our consulting site, which is just tcm-tech.com. We've got the Academy, which I'll show you here in a second. We also have certifications site. Now, before we dive into things, you might say to yourself, this course seems familiar. And that's because it might be. Last year, we released a ethical hacking course in 12 hours. This year, it's up to 15 hours. Last year, that total of views got 3 million views in 11 months, which is great. It hasn't even been a full year yet. And we taught quite a bit of lessons in here. You can see all the different lessons we taught in here. So you might say, hey, what's the difference between this 12-hour course and the 15-hour course? Well, there's quite a few differences, 3 hours to be exact, but even with the 3 hours of time difference, we went through a lot of this. And for example, in the Kali Linux section, that's been completely redone. The Python section's been completely redone. So a lot of these videos and tools and ideas have been brought into 2023 methodologies. So not only are there 3 hours more, but a lot of the videos and content have been recreated for 2023 specifically to make sure that this is up to date and fresh. So you're getting a brand new course. This is the latest and greatest. Now, this course is actually an extension of a 25-hour, it's pretty close to 27 hours now, of materials that is on our TCM Security Academy website. And this is the only time I'm going to try to sell you on anything throughout the entirety of this 15 hours. So I just ask for 1 minute of your time. This course takes the first half. The 15 hours takes the first half of what's in here. If we scroll down to the curriculum, we actually have all the first half here. You'll see this. If you actually came to the website, it's the exact same thing you're getting in this course. This goes all the way through the capstone and the buffer overflows here. And that is a great stopping point. We'll go to the capstone. We'll go through it. It's a great midway point to test your skills. If you get through the midway point and you say, hey, I really like this, I want to get the rest of the course, we have even more stuff in here. We have Active Directory, which is one of my favorite things to pen test against. And I would say it's the best part of the entire course. We teach that. We cover quite a bit of this. All this is on Active Directory right here. We cover more post-exploitation. We cover web app pen testing and application pen testing. We get into a little bit of wireless testing and legal documents and all that fun stuff. So the 15 hours that's here, it's a great resource. It gets you started. If you love it, you love our instruction, you want more, this course is $29.99. All of our courses, in fact, on the Academy, if we go over here, they're all $29.99. So if you're interested, we have an all access pass that gets you access to everything. We've got courses on Linux, Python. We've got courses on privilege escalation, OSINT, external pen testing, all different kinds of stuff in here. If you're interested in that, I just encourage you to check out the website. You don't have to buy anything. This is completely 100% free if you just want to stick with the 15 hours. Last but not least, this course does lead to what is a certification. We have a certification called the PNPT. It's the Practical Network Penetration Testing certification. I'll link it down in the description below. It's a one-of-a-kind certification. You go through, you try to hack an organization, you write a report, you present a debrief. And the good thing about this is it gets you job ready for the field. So if you can get through this certification, you actually go look for the PNPT on LinkedIn or Indeed, you're going to find this on job postings. So this course, 15 hours of this is part of a 50-hour curriculum that we have. And so if you feel that, hey, I really am interested in this field and maybe I want a certification, consider looking at the PNPT as well. And that's really it. We're going to end here. Salesmanship's over. Please enjoy this 15 hours. If you do, please like, comment, subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff. Let's go ahead and jump right into this course. I'm so excited to teach you in this 2023 edition. All right, I hate PowerPoints, but I love this template. I don't know what's so cool about it. It's all the colors, I think. So welcome to A Day in the Life of an Ethical Hacker 2022 edition. Let's talk about a pen tester's day-to-day, and I'm going to highlight this at a very high level. So what we do is we roll out of bed, hopefully we wake up in the morning, and we kick off our day. Now our day can be performing an assessment, and we're going to talk about the different assessment types that are out there. It could be writing a report, it could be giving a debrief, or a collection of the three. When we perform an assessment, we're talking about different types of pen testing or ethical hacking, and we're going to cover the most common types. We'll talk about some other types as well. Once we perform our assessment, we need to write a report. We deliver a report to our client. That report then gets digested, and eventually we give them a debrief if they want one, and we talk about our findings. And so we'll cover this whole process from start to finish. So let's talk about the different types of assessments that we could perform as an ethical hacker. Now, the first type of assessment I want to talk about is what is called an external network pen test. And one of the questions that we ask people when we're doing phone screens and baselines on interviews is we say, hey, can you tell me what an external pen test is versus an internal pen test? And honestly, I would say at least half of the people get the answer wrong. So make sure you're paying attention and you take notes because this may come up on an interview. Now, an external pen test is probably the most common type of pen test that we perform. If you just got hired as a penetration tester and you're brand new to the industry, it's likely they're going to start you out doing external network pen tests. These pen tests are the most straightforward and something that a junior could take on and work through and build up some experience and or confidence as they go through their process. So an external pen test is looking at an organization's security from the outside. This could be us trying to hack in from our mom's basement or from another country or whatever it might be. Whatever scenario plays out in your head, that's what it could be. You're trying to hack in from the outside. The methodology for external pen tests focuses heavily on what's called open source intelligence gathering, or OSINT. We're trying to gather as much intel and data about an organization. Who are their employees? What is their email format? Have they ever been involved in a breach? Can we find out what passwords were in those breaches? Can we collect data and then use it against that organization to breach a login panel or breach the VPN or get into an area where we otherwise would not be allowed into? Now, why do we focus so much on open source intelligence? Well, because this is an external assessment, you have to think about the internet as a whole. There are bots scanning the internet 24/7. If you don't believe me, try putting up an SSH server or something similar and leave it up for 24 hours and see how many login attempts you get on that server. It's a lot. Bots are scanning all the time. So what does that mean for us? Well, that means that if we do vulnerability scanning and we find something that is incredibly dangerous, well, somebody's probably already found that as well. So the chances of us finding something like remote code execution where we can land on a machine externally without doing a lot of work, it's pretty low. Usually organizations have their external networks buttoned up from a patching perspective. So what we're really looking at is the intel that we can gather. Where are the login panels? Who are the users? And how can we use that against the organization? Now, this is the most common type of pen test that organizations do, in my opinion, for two reasons. The main reason is that a lot of compliance organizations dictate that an external network pen test must be performed annually. That is not true for the rest of the pen tests, though some compliance organizations might dictate other pen tests. The external is by far the most common. The other side of this is external pen tests tend to be a little bit cheaper than the rest of the assessments depending on the size and scope of the engagement. And a lot of organizations like to dip their toes in the water before going and doing more assessments with a security firm. So they might test you out and say, hey, let's do an external pen test. We'll see how it goes. If we like you, we'll hire you for more stuff. So between those two reasons, we see a lot of external network pen tests, more so than anything else, in my opinion. Now, these pen tests tend to last around 32 to 40 hours on average, though if you have a very large engagement, that can go a lot longer, or if you have a very small company and you're looking at one IP address or 5 IP addresses and 10 employees, it's probably not going to take you 32 hours to do that pen test, maybe somewhere in the 8 to 16 hour range. We then tend to add another 8 to 16 hours for report writing, and we'll touch base on report writing towards the end of this video. So moving on is what is called an internal network pen test. This is assessing an organization's security from the inside of the network. This means that we somehow breached the perimeter. Perhaps we sent a phishing email and somebody opened our email, clicked on our link, and now we're inside the network. Or maybe we broke into the building and left a Dropbox behind. Whatever scenario in your head you want to play as well, you can do that. What we do on our end is we typically send a laptop out to the client. The client plugs that laptop in, and we are able to remote into that laptop and perform a network assessment as if we were sitting inside the office. This is why a lot of work nowadays is remote, because we don't have to be on site anymore to do internal pen tests. Now, the methodology for an internal penetration test focuses heavily on Active Directory. Now, if you don't know what Active Directory attacks are, you absolutely need to learn those in order to be a successful internal penetration tester. And it's one of those things that a majority of the organizations that are out there use. So I believe the statement that I read once was 95% or 99%, don't quote me on this, by the way, of the Fortune 500 companies use Active Directory in their environments. And I honestly think that this number is way closer to 99% than anything else. Every single internal pen test I've ever done, with the exception of one client, one very small client, has always been on Active Directory. So you need to understand Active Directory methodology in order to perform an internal network pen test. These typically last 32 to 40 hours, though they can run a lot longer, again, depending on the size and the scope. They don't typically run shorter, though I have seen them run 16 to 24 hours if the network is very small, but there is a checklist that we have to run through that is usually in the 32 to 40 hour range. And just like external pen tests, we tack on another 8 to 16 hours for report writing. Now, the third type of assessment I wanted to talk about is a web application pen test. This is probably the second most common. I wanted to group the external and the internal pen test together. But you have to think about networks nowadays versus web applications. There are websites everywhere. There are more websites than there are networks. If we're just counting websites to business networks, there probably are more websites to home networks as well, though I'm not entirely sure of that. I would argue that the answer is probably way more websites than home networks. So with that, there's a lot of attack surface that's out there. So organizations will come to us and they'll say, hey, we need a web application pen test. This can be dictated, again, by compliance. Perhaps stakeholders want to see this, or maybe the client is very interested in the security of the application and wants to make sure that it is very secure before they launch their application. Now, the methodology focuses heavily on web-based attacks, obviously, and the OWASP testing guidelines. So OWASP stands for the Open Web Application Security Project. If you've never heard of it, Google it. It's a great resource. They have testing guidelines for not just web application, but mobile as well. They have how to test, how to defend, how to prevent, all kinds of great things. And we follow their testing guidelines pretty exclusively. If you're ever going to be a pen tester and you want to pen test against web apps, you for sure need to know what the OWASP top 10 attacks are, because you will be asked those in an interview. Now, these engagements last typically 32 to 40 hours, and that is pretty much the minimum. We have a very thorough checklist that we have to go through when we're doing a web app pen test. And I would say it pushes closer to 40 hours than anything else. Unless it were a very, very small and specific web application, they're almost always in the 32 to 40 hour range, with another 8 to 16 hours for report writing. Another common assessment that we are asked to perform as pen testers is what's known as a wireless pen test or a wireless network pen test. And we're assessing an organization's wireless network security. So the methodology will vary depending on what type of wireless network is being used. For example, if they're using a guest network, we might log on to the guest network and test segmentation. Can a guest access internal resources, or is the network properly segmented? If they're using a pre-share key, which is what's common in most households, then we might test that pre-share key for password strength and see how strong the pre-share key is and how strong the password is. If they're using enterprise-based network, then we open ourselves up to a variety of new attacks as well. So our methodology really changes depending on what is being used. Now, wireless pen testing is fairly straightforward. You can look up the methodology online, find blog posts about it. You just need a wireless network adapter that you can honestly pick up for $30 to $50 at most. And I'll leave a link in the description below to my favorite wireless network adapter, but you can just pick one that is compatible with your machine, and that will work and do packet injection. It's honestly where a lot of hackers start. This is where I got my start before I ever learned about real pen testing or anything. I went and bought a cheap wireless adapter, and I started just hacking my own network and some devices that I had laying around at the house, and I learned how to hack wireless pretty quick. So it's one of those things that kind of gets you excited and gets you into the hacking mindset and kind of teaches you some of the wireless assessments that are out there. And I think it's pretty fun as well. Now, these typically last about 4 to 8 hours per SSID. So if we're testing 2 SSIDs, we're probably looking in the 8 to 16 hour range. And then typically another 2 to 4 hours for report writing. All right, the last thing I want to touch on in terms of assessments that we do quite a bit are physical pen tests and social engineering assessments. So when we're doing a physical pen test, we're assessing an organization's physical security. And our methodology is going to depend on the tasks and goals that are at hand that are given to us by the client. So if we're doing a physical pen test, we are going on site and we're trying to break into the building. That can be through cloning badges, that can be through social engineering, that can be through picking locks. There's a lot of different scenarios that are at hand there. Now, that methodology, again, depends on what we're up against, and it also depends on the client's goal. The client might say, hey, we want to see if you can just even get in the building. Or they might say, hey, I want you to get in the building and find our server closet and take a picture of yourself in our server closet. We want to see if you can make it there. So there's typically some goal behind why you're breaking into a building, but it is legal breaking and entering, and it's pretty fun and pretty exciting if that's your jam. And there's a lot of social engineering involved in that. So it's very, very fun engagement to do. The other side of this is pure social engineering. And what I mean by that is doing something like a phishing campaign against an organization. And we might actually do a phishing campaign in combination with an external pen test. So we might combine those together, though often they're left apart. We might do something like a phishing campaign where we call people and we say, hey, I'm from IT. Can you give me your password? Or I just sent you a code to your account. Can you give me the code that I just sent you? We might do a smishing campaign where we send text messages and see if anybody responds back to us. There's a lot of different social engineering that's out there, and we have different campaigns that we can run in different engagements depending, again, on the client's need. Now, the great thing about this is social engineering and physical pen testing offer a lot of learning opportunities and training opportunities. For example, when we do physical pen tests, we wear cameras on our hip and we record everything that we do, not just for our liability, but also for teaching end users at the end of the day. We'll cut that video, have a lessons learned. Here's the good things they did. Here's the bad things they did. And they can walk away with a way to improve moving forward. The weakest element of any organization is going to be the human. You can have a great environment, great policy, security, everything set up, and all it takes is one really nice person to hold the door open for you and that can lead to catastrophic events. So social engineering, again, is a very important part of security, and it's one of my favorite things to assess when I'm doing this type of work. Now, again, these can last anywhere from 16 to 40 hours, maybe even more, depending on the engagement that you're on, plus another 4 to 8 hours for report writing, again, maybe more, depending on the scope of the engagement that you're working. Now, these aren't the only assessments. There are other assessments that we might perform as a pen tester. These tend to get a little bit more specialized, and you might have to take additional training in order to learn this type of stuff. But these are things that we perform at work, and you may end up performing as well. So we have mobile penetration testing. It's a lot like web application penetration testing in the sense that you're testing against an application, except it's on a mobile device, so iOS or Android, and then there's specific methodology and techniques related to those operating systems. You may have IoT or Internet of Things penetration testing. Somebody might send you something. Like one time we got sent over a pressure cooker that was a wireless pressure cooker, and they wanted it pen tested, so we had a lot of fun doing that. There's red team engagements, which are kind of sort of like pen testing, but not really. When I say pen testing, I think of banging at the front door, where red teaming is trying to sneak in whatever creative way you can. So a red team engagement might say, hey, we want you to hack our company. You've got a month or 6 months or a year, and we don't want to hear you. We don't want to see you. We don't want to know about it. Just let us know if you can hack into us. In these types of engagements, the methodology can be anything depending on what is allowed in scope. Usually it's pretty open in the scope. I've heard of red teams sending people to the client location, and they might even live there for a little bit. They might befriend some of the employees, try to become buddy-buddy, learn some internal secrets, maybe get a password, slip them a thumb drive. They might do all kinds of social engineering engagements. It's very, very custom and unique to the client and depends, again, on the scope, which is usually pretty wide, and what they can and can't do. So red team engagements are pretty awesome, but they're also incredibly stealthy, where pen testing is very time limited in the sense that we might only have a week engagement. We're going to know the IP addresses, we're going to know our scope, and we're going to have a set defined limitation in front of us, where red team doesn't have that as much. Now, a purple team engagement is something that you might do, tabletop exercises and things like that, where you as a red teamer or being offensive and working with a blue team or defensive, you work together and that makes purple. And in that sense, you might tabletop and say, hey, I just ran this attack. Do you see me in your network? I just ran this other attack. Do you see me? And you try to establish a baseline, and you can see, hey, where's the detection at? Where is the detection weak? And how can we improve detection mechanisms within the network? It's usually a bit of a more mature process. An organization that's never gone through a pen test before likely isn't just going to jump right into a purple team engagement, but it is something that more mature organizations do in order to improve their baselines and improve their detection mechanisms internally. Now, I've covered just a handful of the different types of pen testing engagements that you can work on. There's car hacking, there's airplane hacking, there's SCADA hacking. There's all kinds of really cool stuff out there that you can do. I just covered the most common items, but you can absolutely specialize if that's something that you're interested in. Now, with all the fun of getting to do assessment work, there comes the downside of report writing and debriefing. I actually enjoy doing both, and in order to be a successful consultant, you really need to be a three-headed person in a sense. You have to be really good at technical abilities. You have to be really good at report writing and communicating effectively, not just to a technical audience, but to a non-technical audience. And you also have to be good with presentation skills in the sense that you need to present your findings to a technical and non-technical audience. So with report writing, we typically deliver a report within a week after the engagement. Now, that report should be high level and technical. So we have what's called an executive summary for non-technical people. Think about a CEO who might not be a technical person. If they're going to read the report, it should still be crystal clear what the issues were and how they should be fixed. And that's what the executive summary is. Now, we have a technical findings section, and that's for the people doing the work. Maybe the security engineer, the network engineer, or the web app developer, depending on who you're working with. They can digest the findings. They can say, hey, here's what they found. Here's what tools they used. Here's how they were able to do it. And here are the recommendations for remediation. Now, recommendations should be incredibly clear. You should have high-level recommendations like, hey, patch this. And you should have technical recommendations as well that says, hey, go to this website, here's how you would install this patch, et cetera, et cetera. So depending on your audience, you want to make sure that you're communicating effectively to both of them. And for a lot of new pen testers, this can be an incredible struggle. It's one of those things that you write a report, you get beat up on it in the QA process, and you just get better over time. And it's just something that is kind of passed down and you learn as you go. So don't be worried if you're not great at report writing. Just make sure that you understand that if you're going to do this job, you will have to write reports and you will have to get better at it as you go. Last but not least is the debrief process. Now, a debrief walks your clients through your report findings. And again, this should be non-technical and technical as well. You may be sitting in a room with a CEO and a network engineer. You might be sitting in front of all technical people. You might be sitting in front of all C-level non-technical people. So you need to make sure that when you are presenting your findings that you can explain it at a high level and a technical level as well. I've seen many people struggle with this. All right. I've been in one situation. I remember that I was in a debrief with a coworker of mine. This was years ago, and he was very much struggling to communicate. He was giving very technical, in-depth details about what he was finding, and the CEO kept stopping him and saying, "I don't understand what you're saying." So we had to do a little bit of translation because he really wasn't great at the debrief process yet. He was still fairly new. And it's one of those things that if you're going to be an effective consultant, you need to be able to do both. Now, the debrief is important because it also gives the opportunity for your client to ask any questions about the findings that you have and address any concerns as well. So maybe there's a finding that they want to challenge or they want more information on. It gives them the opportunity to do that. Because when we give them the initial report, the report is a draft. After the debrief, or if they choose to not have a debrief, we finalize that report. So the debrief is the last opportunity the client has to understand what you're presenting to them and to ask any questions or address any concerns. So it's a very, very important process. All right, hopefully that was informative for you. If you're looking to become a pen tester, you should know at a high level what these different types of assessments are. And you should know what you're getting yourself into, because a lot of people think, oh, it's fun and games, I just get to go hack things. And yes, that's a lot of the job, but a lot of the job is also doing report writing and doing debriefs in front of clients. So if you're not strong with report writing, or if you're not strong with your presentation skills, you may have some time on the struggle bus before you get decent at it. All right, so make sure that you know coming into that those are things that you're going to have to be doing and that you're comfortable doing those things as well. So before we begin in this course and we really start to dive in, it's important to cover one of the topics that I'm going to harp on the most, which is effective note-keeping. If you're going to be successful in your career and you're going to be successful in this course, you really need to take good notes. Now, in this first video, I'm going to show you what my notebook kind of looks like, not only for my personal notebook, but as a notebook for an assessment and how I might take notes for an assessment. And then I'll also show you some note-keeping applications that I prefer or I've heard students prefer. In the second video, we're going to cover how to install one of the applications and another cool application used for taking screenshots. So let's take a look at my notebook first. So here is my notebook, and actually let's click over here. So this is my notebook, and you can see it's really long. It's got all kinds of stuff in here, and it's just something that I build upon. This one in particular is actually only geared towards Active Directory. So I have a few different notebooks. This one is Active Directory, and it's actually a few different courses that I've taken in the past that I've kind of put together. And then just for assessment work, etc., I just kind of have a little cheat sheet here. So I wanted to show you this one in particular because these were built off of courses, and you're going to be working through a course, so kind of just get an idea of how maybe to structure it. So here you can see I structured it, and I've got different modules here where, okay, module 1 might have had this email macro fundamentals. Module 2 here has all these different components to them, right? And we have our notes, then we have child notes, and even sub-children to those child notes. And I'll show you how to create that here in a second. But let's say, for example, enumeration, which is one of the most important things that you're going to cover in hacking. And we take a look at enumeration. You don't have to understand what any of this means here, but you could see if I want to look at a domain and I want to get the current domain that I'm on, here's the command I run. And here is a picture of what it looks like, and here's what comes back when you run that command. That's great. That's what I want to see. And I have a whole list of commands for all of these in here, right? So if I'm confused on a assessment and I want to go and find a command that I'm not sure of, I can go to my little cheat sheet here. Now, again, this is really long, so you have to create your notes the way it really helps you. For a course, I think it's good to write it all out step by step like this, and then go back and make a cheat sheet. I don't need these pictures anymore. I've been doing this for a while. So maybe I just say, hey, get current domain is get net domain. And then I say, hey, okay, get object of another domain. Here's an example of it. I don't need the pictures because it makes it really long. But as an example, and over time, you learn with the pictures as well. At least I do. So let's build from that. Here is an example of an actual assessment that I did for a client. And you can see how I did this. Now, I did an external, internal, and web application assessment for this client, and these were the findings. Now, I'm only going to show you what is masked or obfuscated already or doesn't reveal client information, but as you can see here, one example is on the internal, they had something called SMB signing disabled. You don't need to worry about it, but here in my picture, I've got a nice picture. The picture has highlighted, it says, hey, message signing disabled, that signifies SMB signings disabled. And it has the IP address. So we identified the machine and we give proof of concept that this SMB signing is disabled here. Another example, MS17010. These are both internal exploits that you're going to encounter in this course. Here's one. I checked this machine. It says, hey, this target's not patched. Now this is one I didn't exploit, but it shows that it's actually vulnerable to this attack. So these are a couple screenshots that I'll put. Now, your notes could be different than mine. How I organize is I take a screenshot, I put it in here, and then I make sure that I have at least the IP address and the screenshot for reference because I'll remember it. But if you need to go in here and take detailed notes, that's absolutely fine as well. You always want good notes for your assessments because you never know if a client's going to come back in 6 months or even a year and say, hey, what was that one thing that you did here? And if you go back to your notes, you say, oh, I did this. And some people get down really into the weeds. They have dates, times, everything for step-by-step what they do on an assessment. And that's completely up to you and how well you take your notes. This is kind of how I lay it out. And then you see the green check marks next to it. I add those green check marks when I'm doing my report. So as I'm building my report out and I cover something in the report, I'll just go ahead and right click and I'll change the note icon to a check mark, meaning that I've written that part of the report for that finding. And we just kind of go through over time. So with that being said, I do want to show you some decent applications. The one that I'm using here and that you see is called KeepNote. Now I run on Windows as a base. So keepnote.org, that's how you get KeepNote. It is for Linux, it is for Mac OS X, but this is totally a preference thing. Me, I prefer it. I've been using it for a long time. Some people don't like it, okay? So I'm gonna offer some alternatives as well. Cherry Tree comes built into Kali Linux, as you're going to see here in just a little bit. Worth looking at, worth trying, seeing if you like it. OneNote's another example if you use Microsoft. And if you're a Mac user, a lot of students have told me that Joplin is really good. Now, I've never used this, but I keep hearing great things about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of these into the course resources, and you'll be able to look at them, download them, decide on your own. Now, you're not limited to these 4 note-keeping applications by any means. Feel free to use whatever you like to take notes. If you want pen and paper, that's great as well. And so just make sure that you're taking good notes. And we're gonna harp on this throughout the entire course over and over and over again. So make sure you're taking good notes. So from here, what we're gonna do is we're going to install KeepNote in the next video, and we're gonna install an awesome tool called GreenShot. And I'm gonna show you what GreenShot does and why it's so cool, and I cannot live on any assessment without it. So let's catch you over in the next video when we work on installing those tools. All right, so in that example in the last video, we talked about using KeepNote. So if you go to Google and you type in KeepNote, all you gotta do is come here, and KeepNote works on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X. So Great tool. The only issue with this tool is it has not been updated in a long time. Some people find issue with that. If you're one of those people, I'm actually not, you can use other tools. OneNote is an option. Cherry Tree is also an option. You can also find other options out there for you. If you have a favorite note-taking tool already, that's absolutely fine as well. Just make sure to take good notes, especially during this course, and make the most of it. Learn all the things that you can and incorporate that. So I will show you quickly how to install Keep Note here. And another thing to note too is while we do this is Cherry Tree is available on Kali Linux. We're going to install Kali Linux here very soon. So once we install Kali Linux and we get into the introductory Linux and we explore it, I'll show you a little bit more of Cherry Tree and what that looks like. And we'll talk pros and cons of Cherry Tree when we get there. So here we go. If you are on Windows, you can follow along, or you download your appropriate one here, depending if you're on Linux or if you need Mac as well. So I'm going to go ahead and install the exe, and I'm just going to actually run this. We're just going to say yes, and I'm going to say next, install, and that's it. I mean, it's that quick. And then we just launch Keep Note, and here you go. We've got Keep Note. So the other tool, the really cool tool that I love, this one is called Greenshot. Now this is a screenshot capturing tool. So let's go to downloads here on Greenshot. If you are running on something other than Windows, or Windows or Mac, so basically Linux, you're going to need a different tool. The recommended tool that I have heard out there is called FlameShot, Flame. Though I have no experience with it, I've heard it is identical to Greenshot. So here I'm going to download the latest stable. I'm going to select run. Yes. Okay. Accept the agreement. Give away our firstborn. Next. Place it however you want. I'm just going to next through everything. And I'm going to start Greenshot with Windows Start. That is my preference. I love this tool again. So it's finished. All right. Let's take a look at it. So it should be running. Let's start Greenshot now. Okay, now you see it running down here on the bottom. Okay, let's go. Let's open up a web page. Let's say we want to take a screenshot of something. Now you just hit your print screen button, and this nice cursor gets brought up here. And let's say we wanted to just take this downloads part right here. We're just going to capture this. And now we have choices. We can just save the image that we just grabbed. Or my favorite is that we can actually just open in an image editor, right? So let's open this in their image editor. Look at this. Okay, so here's the picture we just grabbed, right? On top of this, really great tools. Let me show you two that I use always. So I come into effects, I put a border on it. Let's say that you have like a Kali Linux, and Kali Linux, if you've never used it, has a black terminal. It's really nasty. So let's imagine here that it's black. It's nasty when it comes to reporting. So let's imagine that we're in this situation and we're writing a report and we've got this black background similar to this. Well, you can see what I just did. I just inverted it. And I do this for all of my reports. I invert the Kali background. So that way it's white. And that way it looks nice on a report. And when we get into the reporting, you'll kind of see what that looks like. But I like a nice clean background. It saves on ink as well if they were to print it. And it's just nice and neat when you give it to a client. So I always invert my images if I need to. You've got the black border here. Another thing is, let's say you want to point something out. You saw in my Keep Note notebook that I had a highlight. You can just click that button up here and just highlight something like right here. Great. Another tool that's in here is this obfuscate. So let's say that there's like a password or something really sensitive in here that you don't want the client to see, or you don't want to reveal on a final report. You can do that, and then you can just like up the pixel size on this and make it really blurry, you know? So it's a really, really great tool. And then when you're done, you can copy it to your clipboard. You can save the file. I just usually like copy this, and if I want to go paste it, like, you know, make a new notebook or whatever, I'll just paste it in my Keep Note and just kind of go from there. So again, fantastic tool, awesome to use. If I had two recommendations for your note keeping, it's Keep Note and Greenshot. If I had to make one recommendation out of the two, it's absolutely Greenshot. You can be flexible on your note keeping tool. So again, hopefully this helps you. Again, please do take good notes through this course. You're going to find yourself wanting to know, hey, what was that command I ran again? And because we're going to go through so much stuff by the time this is all said and done that you're going to want to remember it. So please take good notes. So from here, let's go ahead and move on into
our networking refresher, and we'll catch you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome to this section on networking. So this section is titled Networking Refresher, meaning that some of you might have a networking background. And if you're looking at this list that's on the screen and you go down the list and you say, yep, I know all those, you can feel free to skip this section. If you've taken some of these in the past and you just might want a little bit of a refresher on them, then this section is for you. We're going to cover these topics not totally in depth, but we're going to use it as a way to brush up. And then we'll hit on networking again when we get into introductory Linux. So if you are unfamiliar with things like TCP, UDP, and the three-way handshake, or if your subnetting's a little shaky or you don't know what the OSI model is, chances are you should probably stick around and just click through this series, watch it, and build that foundation. Remember, we talked about one of the core foundations of pen testing being a strong networking background. This is a good way to build it up, remember what you might have forgotten, and go from there. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the first video, which is going to be IP addresses. What's up, everybody? So I'm going to preface this video really quick with that it is raining pretty hard here. So if the soothing sounds of the rain put you to sleep during this video and you can hear it, I'm very, very sorry. But the show must go on. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about IP addresses. Now, if you've ever used a computer before and you're anywhat familiar with IT, you probably know what an IP address is. But I want to take this a little bit deeper in theory on why we use IP addresses, what types of IP addresses are out there, and talk more about protocols and how IP addresses are actually designed and made up. So I'm here in a Kali terminal, and I'm just going to type in a simple command, and that command is ifconfig. Now, if you've used Linux before, this might be familiar to you. If you used Windows, it's similar to ipconfig. All I'm trying to do is bring up my IP address. So what we can see here is that we have an IP address, which is our inet. This is my IP address here. I also have another IP address, this inet6. This is what's called an IPv6 address. So we've got this inet, which is considered an IPv4, and this inet6, which is considered an IPv6. Now you can notice right away that there's two different types of notations for these. This inet here is in a decimal notation, and the IPv6 is in a hexadecimal notation. We'll get to the importance of that in just a second. So when it comes to IP addresses, this looks probably pretty familiar to us. This is an IP address. This is how we communicate. We communicate over layer 3, and you're going to hear me talking about layers repeatedly throughout the course, or at least throughout this part of the course, so that we can get familiar with how we're actually doing this. So I want you to be familiar with troubleshooting these layers, and these layers all refer to something called the OSI model. So when we talk about layers, we think about the OSI model, and I'll introduce the OSI model here in a few videos, and it should all click once I introduce the OSI model. So if I brought in the OSI model up front, it might be boring, might not make sense. So I'm going to introduce the OSI model near the end, and you're going to say, hey, yeah, that all makes sense. So what we've got here is we've got this IPv4 address, and this is the most commonly used format that we use today, right? We use IPv4 for mostly everything. And again, this is in that decimal notation. So when we see this decimal notation, it's just realistically a bunch of ones and zeros that are put together so that we have this human readable format. Realistically, all we're seeing here with 192, this first section here, this first octet, is actually just a bunch of ones and zeros. It's 8 bits. So we've got a range of 8 ones and zeros here. We've got another 8 here, and 8 here. So when it's all said and done, this inet, or this IPv4, is made up of 32 bits, 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 here, and which equals 4 bytes. So another way to think about that is to think about it as, say, something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, period. Okay, that is one section there. So we've got 8 ones that can make up this, and then we'd have another 8 etc. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. But I do want to give you guys another example. So if we go into our applications and we go to a text editor really quick. So the way this looks is something like this. We start with a number like 128. I'm going to try to space this out as best as possible. And all I like to do is think of 128 as my base. And this will make a lot more sense when we get into subnetting. So please, if you're confused by this, don't worry. This is all theory right now. When we get into subnetting and we get hands-on, it'll make a lot more sense, I promise you. So let's say we have ones and zeros here. If we have a 1 for each of these sections, and I'm going to space this out again as best as possible, it's not pretty. But if we have a 1 for all of these, this equals 255. Why does this equal 255? Well, you take this, and all these numbers add up. 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8, all this adds up to 255. So let's say if we didn't have all the ones and zeros, we had just some ones enabled, like these last 3 here. Okay, well, this would equal 7, because we have 4 plus 2 plus 1 equals 7. So our first number, or whatever number this applied to in the octet, would be 7. So if we had 7.7.7.7, it would just be this numbers repeating over and over. These numbers repeating over and over, right? So be 0.0001111 dot 0.0000111 and so forth. So this is kind of what it looks like behind the scenes, because again, a computer is just ones and zeros. We're all binary. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this out. And we're going to talk a little bit of other theory when it comes to this, and why INET or IPv6 and why IPv4. So let's close this and let's talk about IPv4. So I'm going to bring up a calculator. And with IPv4, we have these 32 bits. So what we can do is we could take 2 to the 32nd power. And this is the possible amount of IP addresses that we could have. So we have somewhere in the 4 billion range of IP addresses. Well, spoiler alert, we don't have only 4 billion people on Earth, right? We're up to 7 something billion at this point, and all these IP address spaces are gone. So IPv4 has been around since 1981. Nobody thought we were ever going to use all these addresses. Computers weren't really a thing. Who knew that we were going to want all these addresses? And these companies started buying them up, and they started buying them up in large chunks. And then they sold those to ISPs, and then ISPs sell those to you. And so these IP addresses have been gone for a very, very long time. And chances are when you have an IP address and you get this IPv4, you're only going to get one. If you're a corporation, you might buy it more, but we've run out of IP address space. There's just not enough to go around. So the theory is, okay, let's come up with something different. Let's come up with IPv6. Now, this hexadecimal is actually in 128 bits, which makes things just a little bit longer and adds quite a bit. So let's take this 2 to the 128 power, and we get a number that I cannot tell you how to say, not even going to try. But I can guarantee you that in our lifetime, we will never use this address space. So we've come up with the solution of IPv6, but nobody really uses it. IPv6 is just a thing that's there, but when we get IPv6 addresses assigned, but still to this day, everybody's using IPv4. Well, how is that possible if we're using IPv4, but we're out of address space? Well, think about this. We're using something called NAT, which is Network Address Translation. Now, let's think about your network. So you might have a cell phone or computer or multiple devices. My network has at least 20 devices on it. I've got cameras, I've got multiple cell phones, smart TVs, everything that connects to my internet gets an IP address. And that's 20 IP addresses right there, right? So let's say I have 20 devices. That's 20 IP addresses. Am I taking up 20 IP addresses out of that 4 billion? No. We're actually using something called Network Address Translation, or it's called NAT for short. And we'll talk about this again when we set up our actual lab. But with NAT, what we're doing is we're assigning these private IP address spaces. So we've got this 192.168 192.168.57.139. Now, if you've ever seen a IP address before and you've been on a network, good chances are it probably started with 192, or maybe it started with a 10 dot or something along those lines. And that's because those are private IP addresses. So anything that starts with 192.168 is not an IP address that is going to be out in the interwebs. It is going to be an IP address that is only known to you. These are called private IP addresses. So because we use these private IP addresses, we can pass them out through what is called a public IP address. Now, to make better use of this, let's go out to Firefox, and I've already got a tab open. So I went to Google and I just said private IP addresses, and I clicked the second image here because I think it's a great image. So if we look at this, there are classes of IP addresses, private IP addresses. Now, there is a class D and E. We're not going to worry about those. The big three are class A, B, and C. If you know these, you are good to go. So if we look at class C, this is what the most common household and small business use. So we see it starts with the 192.168.0.0. So the 192.168 are constant. If you see a 192.168 address, you can guarantee yourself that that is a private IP address space. And then we have the range of changing this number between 0 and 255 and this number between 0 and 255. Why 0 to 255? Well, that'll all make sense when we get into subnetting. But what that allows us to do is have a large number of networks here and a small amount of hosts. But for a regular user like you or I, or a small business, 254 hosts is pretty good. I mean, I'm only using like 20 in my household. So the most common household is probably using this 192 address. But what about a big business, right? Something huge. Okay, well, they might use a 10 address because a 10 address frees you up to anything after this 10 is private. So 10.1, 10.1.1.1, whatever you want to put in here up to 255 on each octet makes for a small amount of networks, but a large amount of hosts. Okay, and don't worry about the host versus network thing. Again, subnetting, we'll talk about that. It'll all make sense. But just imagine the amount of hosts that you can put in here with this wide range. So because of this, you'll see larger corporations using 10 addresses. You'll also see a lot of corporations, even small businesses, using 10 addresses. The matter of fact is, as long as you have this private IP address, you're good to communicate across your network. So any IP address outside of these and the loop back here are free game for the public address space. They're probably already owned, and you purchase those or rent those really from your ISP, your internet service provider. So going back to this thought, we have a class C address. My network's class C, 192.168.57.139 here. So it falls into that class C. I've got all these devices on this 192.168 network. All these devices are talking out of one IP address. That is my public IP address. That is what I rent from my ISP. And all of this network traffic goes out one IP. So this is how we have achieved or solved the issue of running out of address space without having to use IPv6. Not that there's anything wrong with IPv6. It's not pretty. I mean, it's way easier to type this stuff in than it would be to type something like this in. But at the same time, this is how we've solved it. We're able to still use IPv4 in mostly all networks, and we are able to communicate out with this quote-unquote IP address shortage. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to build upon these concepts. Again, IPv4, IPv6 IP addresses are layer 3 protocols. Layer 3 is a router. So when we route traffic, we route via an IP address. So we're going to build upon that as well as we go in. Hopefully this is all just a refresher to you. So that is it for this video. I'll go ahead and catch you over in the next one. All right, so we're going to move down a layer here and talk about layer 2. So remember, IPv4, IPv6, IP addresses as a whole, that is layer 3. We're talking about routing. Here in layer 2, we're going to be talking about a MAC address or a physical address. Now, MAC stands for Media Access Control, And that is identified here in our ifconfig as this ether here. So we can think of this as our physical address and a way that we communicate when we are using switches. Switches communicate over this physical address. This is kind of how they know what device is what. So what we say here is if we have a device, say you just built a computer and you're installing your network interface card or your NIC, you're going to plug that in and you're going to have a MAC address for that NIC. Your cell phone, that's going to have a MAC address. Anything that's using a network interface is going to have a MAC address. So these MAC addresses are important because they utilize layer 2 or switching, and they are how we communicate over switches. Now there's something to be noted briefly about MAC addresses. Now MAC addresses have identifiers. So as you can see here, this MAC address has 6 different pairs of 2, right? And what we can do is we could take the first 3 pairs and we can just copy this and we can go out and we can try to put it into a MAC address lookup. Now for this one, this is just going to be VMware. I'm not sure if it's actually going to come up, but I'm going to go ahead and paste it and see what happens. And you can see that the vendor actually shows up as VMware. So the first 3 pairs here are identifiers, and we can identify what we're up against. If you've ever looked in your house and you've looked at your network and you're trying to find a device and you see the IP address, but the IP address doesn't really help you identify it. You might see something along the lines of a MAC address because your home device, say your router, might also be what's called a layer 2/layer 3 device, meaning it's doing switching and routing for you. And it'll also know the MAC address of that device. So you can take the first 3 pairs here, put those into the Google machine, and see if you can identify what that device is. So if I was unsure, this didn't have a host name or device name, and I could just reach out and say, okay, well, let me look these up. Maybe it'll give me an inkling. It's not going to tell me the exact device, but if I know it's running VMware, then I can say, oh, that's my host machine running. Or if it's related to like Texas Instruments or something, maybe I know that device in my house. So this is just a quick way to look up devices and know about them. The other option or other thing that you need to know here is just that, again, MAC addresses, layer 2, related to switching. I'm just trying to repeat this and get this into your head. So that's all we need to know from this lesson. And we're going to go ahead and I'll catch you over in the next lesson. All right, so now we're moving into layer 4, which is the transport layer of the OSI model. And we're going to talk about what is TCP and what is UDP. So we'll type that in here, TCP versus UDP. So TCP is what is known as the Transmission Control Protocol. And you could think of that as a connection-oriented protocol. And we also have UDP, which is the User Datagram Protocol. And this is a connection-less protocol. So when we have these 2 protocols, one is best suited when it comes to high reliability. That's TCP. TCP is connection-oriented. We want to make a connection, we need high reliability. So you can think of something like a website, which is HTTP or HTTPS. Or you can think of something like SSH or FTP, the file transfer protocol. Those all utilize TCP. When you think about UDP, you might think about something like a streaming service. That's connectionless, or DNS is connectionless, or voice over IP is connectionless. And when this comes into the importance of scanning is super important. We're going to be scanning both TCP and UDP as a penetration tester. And don't worry about scanning right now. When we get into the scanning section, this will make a lot more sense. But we need to know what TCP and UDP are and define them broadly. So the most commonly used protocol that you're going to be scanning is going to be TCP. Now, TCP works on what is called a 3-way handshake. Now, if we look at the 3-way handshake, it's going to look something like this. We're going to first send out a SYN packet, and then we're going to receive back a SYN ACK packet. And finally, we're going to send an ACK packet. Now, how does this work? Now, you could think of this as an interaction. So let's say you have a friend or a neighbor, and you go to your neighbor and you say hello. That's a SYN. Now, SYN-ACK is going to be the response. It's going to say, hey, Syn, I acknowledge you. That's your neighbor waving hello back. And then you know you are good to go start a conversation. So that's the acknowledgement. Now, when we think about this in the terms of ports, now port is a item that can be open on a machine. It's a way to communicate with